My name is Fiona, and I am 33 years old. On Christmas morning, I walked outside to find a massive red bow sitting on the hood of my brand new custom $72,000 Tesla. My father had stolen the keys from my purse and was handing them to my spoiled younger sister. When I told them it was my car, my mother called me selfish, and my father handed me a $5 plastic piggy bank to help me save up for my own. I did not scream or cry. I simply smiled, put a $5 bill into the slot, and walked away. I had no idea that within hours I would execute a plan that would leave my family bankrupt and begging for my help. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who underestimated your worth. Growing up in a wealthy Connecticut suburb meant appearances were everything to my parents. Harrison and Linda cared more about country club status and maintaining the illusion of generational wealth than they ever cared about me. I was the scapegoat, the quiet daughter who refused to play their social climbing games. My younger sister Ashley was their golden child. At 29 years old, she was a chronically unemployed lifestyle influencer with 50,000 followers entirely funded by my parents. I had returned to their sprawling estate for the holidays purely out of a sense of obligation. I arrived late on Christmas Eve, parking my brand new custom Tesla in the expansive circular driveway. I had bought the car in cash just 2 days prior as a reward to myself for closing a record-breaking corporate quarter. My family thought I worked a dead-end information technology help desk job. They thought I sat in sweatpants answering phone calls and resetting passwords all day. They had absolutely no idea that I was the founder and chief executive officer of a highly lucrative digital forensics and financial audit firm. I kept my wealth entirely hidden because I knew exactly how my family operated. Christmas morning began with the usual performative chaos. I woke up in my childhood bedroom feeling the familiar chill of the house. I threw on a simple oversized sweater and walked downstairs to the kitchen to get a cup of coffee. The house was buzzing with loud voices. I could hear Ashley giggling from the front foyer. Her fiancé Cameron was there too. Cameron was a status-obsessed junior executive who was marrying my sister under the false assumption that she had a massive trust fund. My parents had done nothing to correct his delusion. I poured my coffee and noticed that my purse, which I had left on the kitchen counter the night before, was unzipped. The contents were slightly shifted. I reached inside and immediately realized my car keys were missing. A knot of confusion formed in my stomach. Before I could process what was happening, my mother walked into the kitchen wearing a designer silk robe. She did not say good morning or wish me a Merry Christmas. She just grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the front door. She told me I needed to come outside because my father had a huge surprise for Ashley and they needed everyone there for the video. I followed her out the heavy oak front doors and onto the frost-covered driveway. The cold Connecticut air bit at my face, but I barely registered the temperature. Standing right in the middle of the driveway was my pristine black Tesla, and strapped to the hood of my car was a massive shiny red bow. Ashley was jumping up and down on the pavement holding her phone out to record the moment for her social media followers. Cameron stood beside her with a smug smile on his face, looking incredibly pleased to be marrying into a family that handed out luxury electric vehicles for the holidays. My father Harrison stood near the driver's side door holding my key fob. He looked directly at me for a split second, his eyes flashing with a bold, arrogant challenge before turning his attention back to his golden child. He held the keys high in the air. He announced loudly for the camera that his beautiful daughter deserved the best ride in town to run her influencer empire. Ashley let out an ear-piercing scream and ran to hug him. She snatched my keys out of his hand and practically shoved Cameron out of the way to get to the driver's side door. I stood frozen on the porch for exactly 3 seconds. The sheer audacity of the moment paralyzed me. I stepped down onto the driveway and walked directly toward my sister. I kept my voice perfectly calm and low. I looked right at her and stated clearly that she needed to step away because that is my car. The entire driveway went completely silent. Ashley stopped with her hand on the door handle and looked at me like I had just insulted her in another language. She lowered her phone, and her lower lip began to tremble in a practiced pout. Cameron crossed his arms and glared at me, clearly offended that I was ruining this picture-perfect display of wealth. My mother marched down the steps and stepped between me and my car. She pointed a manicured finger at my chest and told me to stop being selfish and jealous. She berated me right in front of Cameron, her voice echoing across the quiet suburban street. She said my sister had a brand image to maintain and needed a luxury vehicle for her career. She looked me up and down with absolute disgust. She told me I just sat at a computer in my sweatpants all day answering help desk tickets. She actually said I could take the bus or buy myself a used Honda because I had no social life to maintain. Ashley chimed in immediately, her voice taking on that shrill, complaining tone she always used when she wanted to play the victim. She yelled that I always tried to ruin her special moments. She complained to Cameron that I was so toxic and jealous that I had maliciously refused to pay for her luxury study abroad trip to Paris last summer. She cried that I was a terrible sister who hoarded my meager paycheck while she was out there trying to build a real public platform. She looked at me with pure hatred and told me to go back inside and let her enjoy her Christmas present. I looked at my father. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew the car was mine. He had snuck into the kitchen while I was sleeping, dug through my purse, and stolen my keys just to give his favorite daughter a prop for her internet videos. I demanded my father tell Ashley to get out of my vehicle. Instead of looking ashamed, Harrison smiled a cruel, mocking smile. He walked over to me slowly. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a cheap, pink plastic piggy bank. He shoved it roughly into my hands. He looked down his nose at me and smirked. He told me that was my Christmas gift, to help me save up for my own car someday. The disrespect was so blatant and calculated that it almost felt surreal. They honestly believed I was a helpless entry-level employee who would just submit to their bullying. They thought they could steal my property and humiliate me into silence. I looked at the cheap plastic pig. I looked at Ashley posing inside my $72,000 car. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not explain that I was the chief executive officer of a firm that audited commercial banks. I simply reached into my pocket, pulled out a crisp $5 bill, and folded it into the slot of the piggy bank. I smiled warmly at my father, told him I was going to bed, and turned my back on all of them. I walked back into the cold house without another word. I went upstairs to my childhood room, locked the door, and waited for night to fall. At 3 in the morning, the house was dead silent. I packed my overnight bag and used the digital key application on my secure phone to quietly unlock my car in the driveway. I backed out silently and drove away into the dark winter night. I temporarily blocked their phone numbers as I drove back to my luxury downtown penthouse. The next morning, I woke up in my own massive bed and checked my phone. I unblocked my father and immediately received a furious voicemail. His voice was shaking with pure rage as he demanded I bring the car back immediately, or he would call the police and report it stolen by me. I sat in the dark of my childhood bedroom. The walls were still painted the same pale yellow my mother had chosen for me 20 years ago. It was a room designed for a ghost, a monument to the quiet, obedient daughter they always wanted, but never actually had. I did not turn on the lights. I did not want to give them any indication that I was awake or plotting my next move. I sat perfectly still on the edge of the narrow twin bed, listening to the ambient sounds of the massive house settling around me. Downstairs, I could hear the faint clinking of crystal glasses and the muffled sound of Cameron bragging about his latest junior executive triumph. I heard Ashley squeal again, probably taking another dozen photos of herself draped over the hood of my property. They were celebrating a victory they had not earned. They were reveling in my supposed humiliation. I simply waited. Patience is a skill you master when you spend your entire life being overlooked and underestimated. It is also the exact skill that made me a multimillionaire forensic auditor by the age of 33. I know how to read the board. I know how to bide my time until the perfect moment presents itself. By 1 in the morning, the house finally fell quiet. The performative laughter ceased, and the heavy oak doors of the master suite clicked shut. By 2, the only sound was the winter wind howling against the frost-covered window panes. At exactly 3 in the morning, I picked up my leather overnight bag. I stepped out of the bedroom and pulled the door shut behind me until the latch clicked softly into place. I knew exactly which floorboards creaked on the grand sweeping staircase. I navigated them entirely by memory, stepping close to the wall where the wood was sturdily reinforced. I bypassed the massive gourmet kitchen completely and walked straight out the side utility door, letting the frigid winter air hit my face. My breath plumed in the darkness, forming white clouds in the freezing temperature. The driveway was pitch black, but the sleek silhouette of my car was unmistakable against the white frost. I did not need the physical key fob my father had so proudly stolen and handed to my sister. That was the beautiful convenience of modern technology. I pulled my secure encrypted phone from my coat pocket and opened the vehicle application. With a single tap, the car registered my biometric signature. The doors unlocked with a soft mechanical whisper. I slid into the driver's seat and let the heavy door shut seamlessly, sealing me inside the quiet cabin. The dashboard illuminated instantly, recognizing my specific driver profile. I put the car in drive and let the silent electric motor carry me backward down the long, winding driveway. I did not turn on the headlights until I was safely out of the neighborhood gates. Once I hit the main road, I pulled over for exactly 30 seconds. I opened my contacts and temporarily blocked my father, my mother, and my sister. I needed absolute total silence for the drive home to process the sheer audacity of what had just occurred. The dashboard glowed with a soft minimalist light guiding me through the empty streets. The drive back to my real life took just over an hour. The dark, winding Connecticut backroads eventually gave way to the glowing, vibrant skyline of the city. I pulled into the highly secure underground garage of my luxury high-rise building. The overnight valet attendant nodded respectfully as I parked in my private, reserved spot. I took the secure elevator directly up to my penthouse level. When the polished steel doors opened into my expansive living room, I finally let out a long, heavy breath. My home was a sanctuary of floor-to-ceiling windows, modern architectural art, and absolute peace. There were no cheap plastic piggy banks here. There were no arrogant men stealing my keys and demanding my gratitude. I took a long, hot shower to wash away the lingering tension of my family estate. The hot water erased the chill of the Connecticut driveway. I climbed into my massive king-sized bed, pulled the heavy silk duvet over my shoulders, and slept better than I had in months. The morning sun poured through the massive glass windows, warming the dark Brazilian hardwood floors. I woke up naturally, feeling entirely refreshed and clear-headed. I walked into my pristine kitchen and pressed a button on my imported espresso machine. The rich, earthy aroma of dark roast coffee filled the air. I stood at the massive marble kitchen island, sipping from my mug and looking out over the sprawling city below. The contrast between my actual reality and the pathetic narrative my family continuously spun about me was almost laughable. They truly believed I was a struggling help desk worker, sitting in a dingy, cramped apartment counting pennies. They had built an entire false reality around my supposed failure, just to make Ashley shine brighter by comparison. They needed me to be poor so they could feel rich. I set my coffee mug down on the cold marble counter. It was time to deal with the inevitable fallout. I picked up my phone and navigated to my blocked contacts list. I unblocked my father first, knowing he would be the primary aggressor in this predictable family drama. Almost immediately, my screen populated with a flood of missed call notifications. There were 19 missed calls from my father alone. He had left one single lengthy voicemail. I tapped the audio file and put the phone on speaker, setting it down on the counter. My father's voice exploded from the small speakers. He was not just angry, he was completely unhinged. The sound of his irrational rage echoed off my high ceilings. "Fiona, you listen to me very carefully. His voice shook with a terrifying blend of absolute entitlement and blind fury. Ashley has been crying in her room for 2 hours. You ruined her entire Christmas morning. You ruined the videos she was filming for her brand. You ruined the surprise I worked so hard to put together. Cameron is disgusted with your petty behavior. You had no right to throw a childish tantrum and drive off in her car in the middle of the night like a thief. I took another slow sip of my coffee, listening to the sheer delusion embedded in his words. He had somehow convinced himself that the car was rightfully hers, simply because he had decreed it so. The mental gymnastics required to steal a $72,000 vehicle from one daughter, hand it to another as a prop, and then play the aggrieved victim was staggering. It was textbook narcissism. I want that car back in my driveway by noon today. His voice grew louder, distorting slightly through the phone speaker as he yelled. You are going to pull up, hand the keys directly to your sister, and apologize to Cameron for making a pathetic scene. If that car is not parked exactly where you left it, I am calling the police. Do you hear me, Fiona? I will report the vehicle stolen by you. I will press maximum charges. Do not test me on this. You are already a massive disappointment to this family. Do not make yourself a convicted criminal too. Call me the second you get this message. The voicemail ended with a sharp, aggressive click. The peaceful silence returned to my kitchen. I stared at the phone, shaking my head. He was entirely serious. He honestly thought he could weaponize the police against me to steal my property. He thought I was weak enough and ignorant enough to be terrified by a baseless threat of legal action. I was a licensed forensic auditor who worked daily with federal regulators, corporate lawyers, and law enforcement agencies to prosecute complex white-collar crime. The irony of his threat was almost too delicious to bear. I picked up my phone, intending to finally send him a digital copy of the title and registration proving my sole ownership. I wanted to end the charade before he actually did something completely foolish and ruined his own holiday. Before my thumb could even hit the messaging application, a sound shattered the quiet morning. It was not a polite knock or a casual ring of the doorbell. It was a loud, aggressive pounding on my heavy front door. The kind of forceful, rhythmic banging that vibrates through the floorboards and signals immediate trouble. The heavy wood actually rattled against the metal door frame. I froze in place. My pulse spiked instinctively as adrenaline flooded my system. My building had 24-hour private concierge service and biometric security elevators. No one could just walk up to my penthouse level without being explicitly announced by the front desk. Whoever was currently at my door had bypassed the building security entirely with absolute unquestionable authority. The violent pounding came again, louder and more demanding this time. A deep, commanding voice shouted through the heavy wood, ordering me to open the door immediately. I walked quickly across the hardwood floor to the digital security panel mounted on the wall near the entryway. I tapped the interactive screen to activate the exterior hallway camera. The high-definition video feed flickered to life, revealing the corridor outside. Standing in my private hallway were two large men. They were fully uniformed city police officers. One had his hand resting casually near his heavy-duty belt, while the other was raising his fist to hammer on my door for a third time. My father had not waited for noon. He had not waited for a call back or an apology. He had actually gone ahead and filed the false police report. He wanted to teach me a lesson about power and obedience. He wanted to see me humiliated in handcuffs, just so Ashley could have her perfect Christmas post. He thought he was the ultimate authority in my life. But as I reached out to unlock the deadbolt, I felt no fear. I only felt a cold, calculating anticipation. The trap was officially set, but my father had absolutely no idea who was really going to get caught in it. I pulled the brass door handle and swung the door open. Two police officers stood in my hallway looking tense. The taller officer rested his hand on his utility belt, while his partner stepped forward with a stern expression. He asked if I was Fiona, and I confirmed. He stated they had received a report of a stolen vehicle on this property. He read off the license plate and the vehicle identification number of my new black Tesla. He told me the vehicle was reported stolen this morning by a man named Harrison, claiming to be the legal owner. The officer demanded to know if the vehicle was in the parking garage and if I had the keys. I did not act surprised. I smiled politely, stepped back, and invited both officers inside my penthouse. They hesitated, clearly not expecting a suspected car thief to be this relaxed, or to live in a residence this expensive. I gestured toward my marble kitchen island and asked if they wanted fresh espresso while we cleared up this misunderstanding. The taller officer declined, but stepped inside, followed by his partner. They looked around my immaculate living room, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows and modern art. The aggressive posture they brought to my door melted into cautious curiosity. I walked behind the counter and opened a leather portfolio from my drawer. I pulled out the dealership paperwork, the registration, and the bill of sale. I laid the documents flat and invited the officers to inspect them. I explained evenly that the man who called them was my father, but he was not the legal owner. I told them I purchased the car 2 days ago, paying the $72,000 balance in full with a cashier check from my personal bank account. I pointed to the signature lines showing my name alone on every legal document. The lead officer leaned over and studied the paperwork. He cross-referenced the vehicle identification number with the dispatch notes on his radio. I watched his jaw tighten as reality dawned on him. He realized they had been dispatched to a luxury high-rise on Christmas morning, not to stop a theft, but to act as pawns in a family dispute. The officer looked up and let out a heavy sigh of irritation. He looked at his partner and shook his head, confirming the paperwork was flawless and legitimate. He turned back to me and apologized for the intrusion, stating they take stolen vehicle reports seriously, especially when the caller insists the theft was a malicious family betrayal. I told the officer I completely understood and harbored no ill will toward them for doing their jobs. I gently suggested that since they had been forced to waste their valuable time and resources on a holiday morning, they might want to inform the person who filed the false report that the matter was officially closed. I offered to confidently dial my father's number for them right then and there on speakerphone. The officer slowly nodded, his expression quickly hardening into absolute professional authority. I picked up my phone, pulled up my father's contact, and hit dial. I set the phone flat on the counter and activated the speakerphone. The phone rang only twice before Harrison finally picked up and answered. His voice boomed through the speaker, dripping with arrogant satisfaction. He demanded to know if I was calling to beg for forgiveness. He laughed cruelly and loudly told me the police should be arriving any second now to forcefully drag me out of my own home in handcuffs. He explicitly said he had warned me not to test his patience, and now I was paying the price. I did not say a word. I simply looked at the police officer and gestured toward the phone. The officer leaned down and spoke in a deep, commanding voice. He identified himself by name and badge number. He stated that he was currently standing in my kitchen, looking at the original unblemished title and bill of sale for the vehicle in question. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. My father stopped breathing. The officer did not give him a chance to recover. He informed Harrison in a firm tone that filing a false police report was a serious crime. He stated that weaponizing the police to settle a family dispute was an egregious waste of taxpayer resources. Harrison finally managed to stammer out a pathetic defense. He tried to backtrack, claiming there had been a miscommunication about the title and that he honestly thought he had a legal right to the car because I was his daughter living under his roof. The officer cut him off instantly. He reminded my father that I did not live under his roof, but in a secure building downtown. He then delivered a blistering warning. He told Harrison that if he ever called the police again to file a fraudulent report or sent officers to harass his daughter over legally owned property, he would personally see to it that Harrison was arrested. The officer finished by telling my father to never call their dispatch center again. The line went completely dead. Harrison hung up the phone, unable to formulate a coherent response to the absolute humiliation of being dressed down by a law enforcement officer he tried to use as an attack dog. He lived his entire life obsessed with looking powerful in front of other men. Getting caught in a blatant lie and being threatened with arrest over a speakerphone was the ultimate destruction of his ego. The two officers thanked me for my time. They apologized once again for the early morning disturbance and wished me a Merry Christmas before walking out of my penthouse and letting the front door shut behind them. I stood alone in my quiet kitchen, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction wash over me. I placed my paperwork back into the portfolio and locked it in the drawer. I poured another fresh cup of coffee and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the city below. The morning was bright and clear. My father had played his opening move and he lost spectacularly. He assumed I would cower at the mere threat of authority, but he fundamentally misunderstood who I was. I was not the quiet, submissive teenager he remembered. I was a woman who built her career tearing down arrogant men who thought they were above the law. Minutes later, my phone screen lit up with a rapid succession of text messages. They were not from my father. They were from my mother, Linda. The notifications stacked up, filled with hysterical words and frantic accusations. I picked up the phone and read through her attempts at manipulation. She called me a traitor to my own blood. She demanded to know how I could do something so cruel to my father on Christmas morning. She typed that Harrison was pacing the living room having a panic attack because of the humiliation I caused him. She said he was a respected businessman and if Cameron's wealthy family found out his reputation would be permanently ruined. She completely ignored the fact that my father initiated the conflict by trying to have me arrested for stealing my own car. In Linda's twisted reality, any action taken to defend myself was viewed as a vicious, unprovoked attack on the family. She typed that I owed Ashley a massive apology for ruining the holiday, and that I needed to wire them $72,000 immediately to compensate for the emotional distress I inflicted. She furiously ended her long barrage of messages with a massive threat, explicitly stating I would be completely and permanently cut off from the family wealth and social standing forever. I read her unhinged demands with a cold, detached amusement. They had no wealth to cut me off from, and their social standing was just a fragile house of cards. I swiped the notifications away and set the phone down, deciding to ignore her completely. I turned my attention back to my laptop to review some client files. My personal phone vibrated with a completely different alert tone. It was a rapid-fire series of notifications from a social media platform I rarely checked. The alerts poured in by the dozens, then by the hundreds. My phone buzzed continuously, vibrating across my desk like an angry hornet. I quickly picked up the device and opened the application to see what was causing the sudden massive surge in activity. Ashley had not taken her defeat quietly. Realizing that the police were not going to bring her my Tesla, she decided to wage war in the arena, where she felt she had the most power. She had launched a coordinated, vicious public smear campaign against me and directed her followers straight at my professional life. I sat at my desk and tapped the screen of my phone to view the notification. The video was already circulating rapidly, accumulating thousands of views and hundreds of angry comments. Ashley was sitting on the floor of her perfectly curated bedroom. She was wearing an oversized designer sweater and had strategically smudged her mascara to look like she had been crying for hours. She looked directly into the camera with wide, innocent eyes and began to sob. Her voice trembled as she told her 50,000 followers a completely fabricated story about her cruel, jealous older sister. She claimed that I was a bitter, toxic deadbeat who could not stand to see her happy. She looked into the lens and wiped a fake tear from her cheek, stating that I had maliciously stolen her Christmas gift right out of the driveway. She painted a picture of herself as a helpless victim who just wanted to celebrate the holidays with her family. Then she pivoted the narrative directly to her upcoming wedding. She cried that she was marrying the man of her dreams, and that my supposed theft was a calculated attempt to sabotage her high society wedding to Cameron out of pure, unadulterated jealousy. She asked her followers to send her love and support because she was dealing with a family member who was actively trying to destroy her mental health. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She knew exactly which buzzwords to use to incite an internet mob. She positioned herself as the radiant, successful bride-to-be, and me as the miserable older sister trying to tear her down. The comments section was a cesspool of outrage. People who had never met me were calling me a thief, a psychopath, and a monster. They demanded justice for Ashley, and they did not stop at comments on her video. I opened another tab on my computer and checked the professional listings for my business. My highly respected digital forensics and financial audit firm was suddenly under a coordinated digital attack. The notification bell on my professional dashboard flashed aggressively. Within minutes, my firm had received dozens of one-star reviews. The reviews were completely unhinged. They accused my company of unethical practices, terrible customer service, and outright fraud. Ashley had clearly directed her most loyal followers to find my workplace and destroy my professional reputation. They thought they were ruining a helpless information technology worker. They did not realize they were leaving a digital trail of coordinated harassment against a licensed federal auditor. I did not panic. I did not cry. I am a chief executive officer who deals with high-stakes corporate fraud on a daily basis. A social media temper tantrum from an unemployed influencer was nothing but background noise. I calmly took screenshots of the video, the comments, and the coordinated fake reviews. I compiled them into a clean digital file and forwarded them to my legal team with a simple instruction to issue a formal cease and desist order for defamation and tortious interference with a business. I also contacted the platform representatives directly using my corporate credentials to flag the brigaded reviews for immediate removal. The entire defensive operation took me less than 15 minutes. Just as I closed my laptop, my personal phone vibrated on the desk. The screen illuminated with a long block of text from my mother. Linda had clearly decided to join the offensive. She completely ignored the fact that my father had just committed a crime by filing a false police report against me. In her mind, the only tragedy was that Ashley was upset. I opened the message and read her delusional demands. "Fiona, you have completely crossed the line this time," her text began. "You have embarrassed your father in front of the authorities and you have broken your sister's heart on Christmas morning. I do not care what kind of petty justification you think you have. You are a traitor to your own blood. Cameron and his family are furious about the distress you have caused. We have a social standing to maintain in this community, and your ghetto behavior is jeopardizing everything. Since you refuse to return the vehicle to its rightful owner, you will compensate your sister immediately. I expect you to wire $72,000 to Ashley by the end of the business day tomorrow. Consider it compensation for the severe emotional distress you have inflicted on a bride-to-be. If you do not send the money, you will be completely and permanently cut off from this family. You will not be invited to the wedding. You will be removed from the inheritance. You will be dead to us." I read the message twice just to marvel at the sheer audacity of her entitlement. She was demanding $72,000 in cash as an emotional damage payout for a car I already owned. The threat of being cut off from the family was the most laughable part of the entire message. They had absolutely no wealth to pass down. Their country club lifestyle was funded by debt and desperate social climbing. The thought of being removed from their toxic orbit was a blessing, not a punishment. They honestly believed that I needed their validation to survive. They thought the threat of losing their approval would force me to open my checkbook and fund their illusions. I did not reply to my mother. I simply took a screenshot of her extortion attempt and added it to the legal file I had just created. I set my phone face down on the polished wood desk and decided to completely ignore the manufactured drama. I had real work to do, and I refused to let their pathetic circus consume my holiday weekend. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the entryway console table. The building concierge had brought up a stack of physical mail earlier that morning and left it neatly arranged on the marble surface. I decided to focus my mind on mundane reality. I picked up the stack and began sorting through the envelopes. Most of it was standard corporate correspondence holiday greeting cards from business associates and thick glossy magazines. But halfway through the pile, a plain white envelope caught my attention. It was from a regional bank located in Connecticut. It was a bank I knew incredibly well. In fact, my firm had recently been retained by this exact financial institution to conduct third-party audits on their high-risk commercial accounts. I turned the envelope over in my hands. The address block was strange. It was originally addressed to my parents' sprawling estate in Greenwich, but a yellow post office forwarding sticker was plastered across the front, redirecting it to my downtown penthouse. I realized immediately what had happened. I had recently updated my primary residential address on my global credit file, and the automated postal system had caught a piece of mail bearing my name and forwarded it to my actual location. A cold knot of genuine unease formed in my stomach. I had absolutely no personal accounts with this specific regional bank. There was no legitimate reason for them to be sending correspondence to my parents' house, with my name attached to it. The digital forensics expert inside me instantly went on high alert. The casual amusement I felt regarding my sister's internet video vanished completely. This was not social media drama, this was the banking system. I walked back to my desk and picked up a heavy silver letter opener. The metal felt cold in my hand. I slid the sharp edge under the flap of the envelope and sliced it open with a single smooth motion. I pulled out a thick piece of premium paper and flattened the document under the bright desk lamp. The document was printed with a bold red banner across the top margin. The bold red letters spelled out a phrase that makes any financial professional stop breathing. Final notice of late payment. I read the numbers and the account details with a growing sense of absolute horror. It was a statement for a home equity line of credit. The principal balance of the loan was exactly $150,000. The line of credit had been taken out directly against my parents' Connecticut estate. The statement indicated that the account was severely past due and was currently facing imminent default proceedings. But the late fees and the balance were not the terrifying part. I scanned down to the bottom of the page to read the liability section. My eyes locked onto the printed text, and my blood ran ice cold. The loan was not solely in my father's name. My name Fiona was clearly printed in bold black ink, right next to his. I was listed as the primary guarantor on a $150,000 loan. I stared at the document while the reality of the situation crashed over me like a tidal wave. I had never signed this document. I had never authorized a home equity line of credit. I had never spoken to a loan officer at this bank regarding my parents' estate. There was only one possible explanation for this piece of paper existing. My parents had stolen my identity. They had taken my personal information, my social security number, and my pristine credit history, and they had forged my signature on federal bank documents. They had quietly saddled me with $150,000 of massive secret debt. I knew exactly where that money had gone. It had not gone into home repairs or sensible investments. It had gone directly to funding Ashley. It paid for the designer clothes she flaunted in her videos. It paid for the luxury trips to Paris she claimed she earned herself. It paid for the extravagant engagement party she threw to impress Cameron and his wealthy relatives. My parents had quite literally stolen my financial future to fund my sister's fake influencer lifestyle. They had committed federal identity theft just to keep up appearances at the country club. The red bow on the Tesla and the childish text messages from my mother were just a smokescreen. The real betrayal was printed on the paper trembling in my hands. I set the piece of paper perfectly flat on the surface of my heavy mahogany desk and stared at it for exactly 1 minute. The initial shock evaporated and was immediately replaced by a cold mechanical focus. This was no longer a petty family dispute over a stolen Christmas gift or a barrage of fake internet reviews. This was federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. I closed the email application containing Ashley and her pathetic smear campaign. I slowly opened my secure encrypted workstation. I am the chief executive officer of a highly respected digital forensics firm. Tracing hidden assets and uncovering complex financial fraud is exactly what I do every single day of my professional life. I have spent years building a bulletproof reputation by dismantling the elaborate lies of desperate executives who thought they were entirely above the law. My parents had foolishly decided to commit a financial crime against the one person who prosecuted financial crimes for a living. I bypassed the standard consumer credit bureaus entirely and logged directly into the institutional clearinghouse portal using my executive credentials. I initiated a comprehensive global pull of my entire financial history. Within seconds, the system populated a massive data file on my secondary monitor. I cross-referenced my legitimate accounts with the fraudulent home equity line of credit. The loan had been established exactly 3 years ago. I noted the specific regional bank branch and the loan officer who processed the paperwork. I drafted a priority-marked email requesting the complete origination packet for the loan in question. I cited my legal status as the listed primary guarantor and attached the late notice as authorization. I did not have to wait long. The banking sector operates swiftly when a known forensic auditor flags an account for suspicious activity. 45 minutes later, a secure digital vault link arrived in my inbox. I downloaded the massive file containing the entire history of the home equity line of credit. I opened the original application documents and zoomed in on the signature line. The forgery was laughably amateurish. My mother had clearly attempted to mimic the curve of my handwriting using an old document, but the pen pressure was entirely wrong. It lacked the fluid, confident stroke of my actual signature. I could clearly see the hesitation marks where the pen had stalled on the paper, exposing the underlying anxiety of a thief who knew she was committing a felony, but stubbornly decided to proceed anyway. But the physical forgery was only the surface of the betrayal. I needed to see exactly where the stolen money had gone. I opened the ledger showing the disbursement of the $150,000. The funds had not been used to repair the roof of the Greenwich estate or update the electrical system. The money had been immediately transferred out of the equity account and funneled directly into a series of external checking accounts. I ran the routing numbers through my tracing software. The truth materialized on my screen in a neat chronological list of transactions. The first major wire transfer was for $89,000. It was sent directly to a high-yield commercial credit card company to pay off an account held solely by my sister Ashley. My parents had stolen my identity to wipe out nearly $90,000 of consumer debt that Ashley had accumulated while pretending to be a successful lifestyle influencer. They used my pristine credit score to secure a massive loan against their property and paid off her debt in one single transaction. The remaining $61,000 of the stolen funds painted an even more sickening picture. I traced the subsequent wire transfers as they left the bank over the following months. $10,000 went to an exclusive floral designer in Manhattan. $15,000 was wired to a luxury catering company. $8,000 went to a boutique dressmaker. $20,000 secured the rental of a historic waterfront venue. My parents had used the rest of the stolen money to fund Ashley and her lavish engagement party. Cameron and his status-obsessed family had attended that spectacular event, completely unaware that the entire evening was financed by my stolen identity. My mother and father had stood there drinking vintage champagne and accepting compliments on their beautiful family while secretly shackling me to a massive financial burden. I leaned back in my leather desk chair and let the sheer magnitude of their betrayal wash over me. The red bow on my Tesla and the ridiculous social media smear campaign felt incredibly trivial now. My family had not just underestimated me, they had fundamentally destroyed any remaining shred of loyalty I possessed. I picked up my personal phone and opened the voice recording application. Connecticut is a one-party consent state regarding recorded communications, but I did not even care about the legal technicalities in that moment. I simply wanted a pristine, undeniable audio record of their confession. I hit the record button and dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring. Her shrill voice was particularly sharp and filled with a triumphant, haughty energy. She is practically inconsolable over the completely fabricated theft of her precious gift. Her followers are absolutely disgusted by your behavior. Are you calling to tell me you have wired the $72,000 to her account? Because if you are not, I will hang up this phone right now. I kept my voice perfectly flat and devoid of any emotion. I told her I was not calling about the car or the pathetic internet videos. I stated clearly that I was holding a final notice of late payment for a $150,000 home equity line of credit taken out against the Greenwich estate. I told her I already possessed the original origination documents and the forged signature. I informed her that I had traced the disbursement of the funds directly to Ashley and her massive credit card debt. My mother did not immediately burst into tears or offer a desperate apology. Instead, she fell back on the only defense she knew. She went entirely on the offensive. "You have absolutely no right to go digging through our private financial matters, Fiona," she snapped, her voice trembling with misplaced indignation. "We had to use your credit. Ours was completely tied up in your father's business ventures, and the bank refused to extend our current limits. Ashley was in a terrible position, and she needed our help. You are family, Fiona. You are supposed to share the burden when things get difficult. You have always been so selfish with your money. Besides, we are paying it off mostly. We just fell a little behind this quarter because of the wedding expenses." I listened to her justify multiple federal felonies with the casual annoyance of someone discussing a minor scheduling conflict. She honestly believed that being family granted her the absolute right to steal my identity and mortgage my financial future. She felt entirely entitled to my credit score to bail out her golden child. "You committed identity theft and bank fraud," I stated calmly, ensuring my voice was perfectly clear for the audio recording. "You stole $150,000 in my name to buy Ashley designer clothes and fund a party. That is not sharing the burden, Mother. That is a major financial crime, and it carries a mandatory prison sentence." Before my mother could stammer out another ridiculous excuse, I heard a sudden scuffle on the other end of the line. A heavy hand slapped against the phone receiver. The sound of muffled shouting echoed through the speaker as my father forcefully ripped the phone out of my mother's hand. He had clearly been listening in the background and realized the situation had escalated far beyond a simple family argument. Harrison did not sound embarrassed or ashamed that his massive secret had been uncovered. He sounded like a cornered animal preparing to strike. He took a deep breath, and his voice dropped to a low, menacing growl. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little witch," Harrison snarled into the phone. "You are not going to do absolutely anything about that loan. You are going to keep your mouth shut, and you are going to pay the remaining balance in full today. If you even think about contacting the authorities or reporting this to the bank, I will personally destroy your entire miserable life. I know exactly who your biggest corporate clients are, Fiona. I have connections at the highest levels of the financial sector. If you blow the whistle on this family, I will make sure your precious auditing firm is blacklisted across the entire industry. I will manufacture a scandal so massive you will never work in finance again. You will pay this massive debt, or I will completely ruin you without any hesitation." I did not interrupt his tirade. I let him vent his manufactured fury, allowing the recording application to capture every single syllable of his extortion. He was breathing heavily into the receiver, his anger masking his underlying desperation. He honestly believed he held the ultimate trump card. He thought he had cornered me in a flawless financial trap. Harrison lowered his voice, adopting the cold, calculating tone he used when negotiating ruthless corporate acquisitions. He told me that if I went to the police or alerted the bank fraud department about the forged signature, he would simply stop making payments on the home equity line of credit entirely. He explicitly outlined his blackmail scheme. He said he would let the $150,000 loan go into immediate default. He taunted me, stating that my pristine credit score would be dragged down into the mud right alongside his. He laughed a dark, humorless sound and told me good luck running a prestigious financial auditing firm with a massive defaulted, fraudulent loan sitting on my public record. He knew that in my industry, personal financial integrity was paramount. A defaulted six-figure debt would instantly trigger regulatory reviews and potentially revoke my security clearances. He was leveraging my hard-earned professional reputation to shield himself from federal prison. His demands were clear and entirely non-negotiable in his mind. He told me I had until the end of the business day to withdraw the stolen vehicle report and formally apologize to my mother. But that was only the beginning of his extortion. He demanded that I sign the title of the $72,000 Tesla over to Ashley, legally transferring ownership to her as a wedding gift. He insisted this was the only way to repair the emotional damage I had caused his golden child. If I complied with his ridiculous demands and remained silent about the identity theft, he generously offered to continue making the absolute minimum monthly payments on the fraudulent loan. He framed this as a massive favor to me. He actually expected me to surrender my luxury vehicle and live under his permanent financial blackmail just to keep my credit score intact. He told me to think very carefully about my next move because he held my entire future in the palm of his hand. He finished his monologue by telling me I was a selfish, toxic daughter who deserved every ounce of this stress. He then slammed the phone down, terminating the connection with a sharp, aggressive click. I stood in the silence of my penthouse staring at the disconnected call screen. The audio file automatically saved and uploaded to my encrypted cloud server, ensuring the evidence was permanently secured. I felt no fear. I felt no panic. I only felt a profound, overwhelming sense of clarity. Harrison was a foolish, arrogant man, playing checkers while I was managing a three-dimensional chessboard. He truly believed he possessed the power to destroy me, because he was operating under the massive delusion that I was just a lowly, entry-level information technology worker. He thought my firm was a fragile little startup that could be easily crushed by a few well-placed phone calls from a supposedly influential businessman. He was entirely blind to the reality of my existence and the sheer scope of my professional authority. My family had spent the last decade aggressively ignoring my career trajectory. They never asked what I did, they never inquired about my clients, and they willfully dismissed my independence. That willful ignorance was about to become their absolute undoing. My boutique digital forensics and financial audit firm was not a small, vulnerable enterprise. We were a highly specialized elite agency retained by federal regulators, top-tier law firms, and major commercial banks to investigate deep-rooted institutional fraud. We handled cases involving hundreds of millions of dollars, tracing phantom assets through complex international webs of shell companies. We dismantled corrupt corporate executives for a living. And the most beautiful poetic irony of this entire situation was the specific regional bank my parents had defrauded. The very institution holding their fraudulent home equity line of credit was not a faceless corporate monolith to me. They were my direct client. Just 3 weeks ago, the board of directors at that exact bank had signed a massive 2-year retainer agreement with my firm. They had hired us to conduct rigorous third-party compliance audits on their entire portfolio of high-risk commercial accounts. They brought us in to identify and eliminate toxic liabilities before the federal regulators arrived for their annual inspection. My parents had essentially walked into my own house and attempted to rob me. The regional bank executives trusted my firm completely, giving us unrestricted administrative access to their secure internal servers. I had the highest level of security clearance available outside the banking commission itself. Harrison thought he could blackmail me by threatening my relationship with the bank. He had no idea that I essentially operated as the bank's most trusted financial watchdog. I did not need to make a frantic, desperate phone call to a low-level fraud department representative to report the forged signature. I had the direct cellular number of the chief risk officer programmed into my phone. But simply reporting the identity theft was no longer enough. My parents had escalated the situation from a family dispute to outright criminal extortion. They had demanded my car and threatened my livelihood. I was not just going to defend myself. I was going to systematically dismantle the financial foundation they used to prop up their fake country club lifestyle. I walked back to my desk and sat down in my heavy leather chair. I looked at the bank notice still resting under the bright light. The $150,000 loan was a symptom of a much larger disease. Harrison was the owner and chief executive officer of a mid-sized regional logistics and supply chain company. For years, he had bragged about his massive profit margins and his brilliant business acumen. He constantly belittled my career choices while parading his corporate success in front of the extended family. But successful, wealthy businessmen do not commit federal identity theft against their own children to pay off their younger daughter's credit card debt. They do not leverage their primary residence to the brink of foreclosure just to fund a lavish engagement party. The math simply did not add up. If his logistics company was as wildly successful as he claimed, he would have had the liquid capital to handle Ashley and her expenses without resorting to criminal forgery. The fraudulent loan indicated a severe, desperate cash flow problem. Harrison was drowning. I could smell the financial desperation in his voice when he threatened me. He was terrified of losing the country club membership, the luxury cars, and the social status he had built his entire identity around. He was a fraud pretending to be a king. I reached out and woke up my encrypted workstation. The multiple monitors glowed to life, illuminating my office in a cool blue light. I had initially planned to spend the holiday weekend relaxing and enjoying the quiet city, but my father had chosen to wage war. I cracked my knuckles and stretched my neck, preparing for a deep dive into the corporate underworld. I routed my connection through a secure virtual private network, masking my location, and establishing a heavily encrypted tunnel directly into the regional bank's primary data server. The login portal appeared on my center monitor, demanding my multi-factor authentication credentials. I typed in my complex alphanumeric password and approved the biometric prompt on my secure mobile device. The system accepted my credentials, instantly granting me unrestricted administrative access to the bank's entire commercial loan portfolio. The dashboard displayed thousands of corporate accounts, representing billions of dollars in commercial liabilities. I was now operating with the full authority of a mandated federal auditor. I bypassed the consumer database, where my fraudulent home equity line of credit resided. That matter was already perfectly documented and secured for the authorities. My focus had shifted entirely to the source of my father's arrogant pride. I opened the commercial search interface and placed my hands on the keyboard. I typed the legal corporate name of Harrison's Logistics Company into the search bar. I selected the parameters to pull every single document associated with his business, including corporate tax returns, balance sheets, collateral guarantees, and payroll ledgers. I hit the Enter key and initiated the audit. The progress bar flashed across the screen as the server retrieved the heavily guarded financial secrets of the man who thought he could ruin my entire life. The progress bar hit 100%, and the screen instantly populated with a cascading waterfall of financial data. I did not start with the glossy quarterly reports that executives use to pacify naive investors, or the polished summaries prepared for low-level account managers. I went straight for the raw, unvarnished general ledgers. I opened the primary operating accounts for Harrison's Logistics Company and began mapping the cash flow over the preceding 36 months. It took my trained eye less than 10 minutes to tear down the elaborate illusion my father had spent a decade building. The logistics empire he constantly bragged about at country club dinners was nothing more than a hollow, decaying shell. The company was not just failing, it was functionally and mathematically bankrupt. I scrolled through the accounts payable tab and watched a disastrous narrative unfold in bright red numbers. He was bleeding capital at an astonishing rate. His major transportation contracts had quietly dried up over a year ago, yet his executive operating expenses had somehow doubled. He was sitting on a mountain of severely delinquent invoices from subcontractors, independent freight drivers, and international shipping vendors who were threatening litigation. He was effectively running a ghost ship. The only thing keeping the doors open was an aggressive, deeply unsustainable cycle of taking on high-interest, short-term corporate debt to pay off slightly older high-interest corporate debt. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul on a massive commercial scale. The sheer incompetence of his financial management was staggering. He had burned through his legitimate credit lines months ago, leaving the company entirely devoid of operating capital. That explained the desperate $150,000 home equity loan. He had tapped out every single corporate resource available and was forced to steal my identity just to keep Ashley from publicly drowning in her own delusions of grandeur. But gross incompetence is not necessarily a federal crime. I dug deeper, routing his transaction history through my proprietary anomaly detection algorithm. I was looking for the specific mechanisms he was using to hide this massive insolvency from his remaining creditors. The algorithm flagged a cluster of recurring outbound wire transfers almost immediately. The destination accounts belonged to 3 distinct limited liability companies registered in Delaware. I ran the registration data through the state corporate database and struck gold. All three entities listed Harrison as the primary registered agent. He was not just failing at business, he was actively committing systematic corporate wire fraud. I watched the digital trail as he shuffled thousands of dollars between his primary operating account and these fabricated shell companies. He was generating fake invoices from these dummy corporations, billing his own logistics company for consulting services that were never rendered. He would then wire the money to the shell accounts, artificially inflating his corporate expenses to manipulate his tax liabilities, while simultaneously pulling untraceable cash out of the failing business to fund his personal lifestyle. I uncovered extravagant purchases masked as business expenses, including lavish overseas vacations and high-end luxury vehicles that were falsely declared as corporate fleet assets. It was a classic embezzlement scheme, executed with the sloppy desperation of a man who thought he was smarter than the entire banking system. I opened the pending applications portal on the bank server to see if he had any active requests in the pipeline. My blood ran completely cold. Sitting at the very top of the regional branch's priority queue was a massive commercial loan application filed under Harrison's logistics company. He was not asking for a small financial lifeline to cover his upcoming payroll. He had formally applied for a $2 million commercial expansion loan. The electronic timestamp indicated that he had frantically submitted this desperate application less than 48 hours ago. I opened the application packet and reviewed the supporting documentation he had submitted to the senior loan officers. It was a masterpiece of absolute fiction. Harrison had provided the bank with completely falsified revenue reports, deeply manipulated profit and loss statements, and forged tax documents that falsely portrayed his dying logistics company as a thriving, highly profitable enterprise poised for massive international expansion. He was attempting to secure $2 million in federal banking funds using fabricated collateral and entirely fraudulent financial metrics. The sheer audacity of the crime was breathtaking. He had just threatened to destroy my professional reputation while simultaneously attempting to defraud the exact bank that employed me to catch people exactly like him. He was walking straight into a high-voltage trap of his own making, and he was entirely oblivious to the danger. The personal anger I felt regarding the stolen car and the social media harassment completely evaporated. It was replaced by the icy clinical precision of a federal auditor. Harrison was no longer my father. He was a high-value target in a major corporate fraud investigation. I detached all emotion from the process and shifted entirely into my professional element. I began compiling the forensic evidence. I extracted the digital logs of the fraudulent wire transfers, capturing the precise timestamps, routing numbers, and IP addresses associated with his shell company network. I downloaded the $2 million commercial loan application, ensuring that every falsified revenue report and manipulated tax document was perfectly preserved in its original format. I cross-referenced his submitted financial statements with the actual raw data from his dying ledgers, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that he had intentionally committed bank fraud. The sheer scale of his deceit was absolutely staggering. I did not stop with the corporate crimes. I pulled the complete origination file for the $150,000 home equity line of credit. I placed the forged signature document directly alongside the evidence of his commercial wire fraud. I meticulously built a comprehensive timeline that connected his failing logistics company to the desperate theft of my identity and the subsequent payout of Ashley's credit card debt. I merged the personal betrayal with the corporate felonies, creating an airtight, undeniable legal dossier. This was not a circumstantial case built on hearsay or family grievances. This was a bulletproof forensic audit backed by immutable digital evidence extracted directly from the bank's own secure servers. The dossier proved that Harrison was running an elaborate criminal enterprise spanning both consumer and commercial banking sectors. When I handed this file over to the bank executives and the federal authorities, there would be no room for negotiation. There would be no quiet settlements. The documentation I had just compiled carried mandatory minimum prison sentences for wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. I formatted the final report according to strict federal regulatory standards, ensuring every single claim was backed by hard financial data. I cross-linked every fabricated invoice to the corresponding wire transfer, creating an inescapable web of documented guilt. I meticulously verified that every single digital fingerprint tied directly back to his primary workstation at the logistics headquarters. There was absolutely no way he could blame this on a rogue employee or an external hacker. I attached the audio recording of his extortion attempt as the final piece of evidence showcasing his clear intent to weaponize the fraudulent debt against a licensed auditor. I finalized the encryption on the dossier and saved it to an isolated, secure drive. The trap was fully set, but I needed time to execute the final maneuver. I could not simply email this massive file to the bank executives on a holiday weekend. An audit of this magnitude required a formal in-person presentation to the board of directors and the chief risk officer. I needed to walk them through the timeline and show them exactly how Harrison had compromised their institution. More importantly, I needed to ensure that Harrison felt entirely secure in his blackmail attempt. If he suspected for even a single second that I was actively investigating his commercial accounts, he would immediately begin destroying digital evidence, emptying the shell accounts, and potentially attempting to flee the jurisdiction before the authorities could freeze his assets. He was incredibly volatile, and a cornered narcissist was always the most dangerous variable in any financial investigation. I had to pacify his massive ego and make him believe that his threats had successfully terrified me into total submission. I picked up my personal phone and opened the messaging application. I navigated to the group chat containing my mother and father. I stared at the screen and carefully crafted the exact words needed to feed his arrogance and buy me the necessary time to finalize my devastating counterattack. I kept the tone subservient and hesitant, playing the role of the defeated daughter perfectly. I took a long, deep breath to steady my racing pulse. I typed out a calculated lie and then slowly hit send. I need a few days to think about giving Ashley the car. Please do not default on the loan. The delivery confirmation receipt appeared beneath my text message almost instantly. I set the phone face up on the polished mahogany surface of my desk and waited. I knew the psychological profiles of my family members better than they knew themselves. Harrison was a cornered narcissist fueled by unearned arrogance. Linda was his primary enabler, surviving entirely on the illusion of country club supremacy. They were fundamentally incapable of recognizing a strategic retreat. To them, my calculated hesitation was a blood-in-the-water moment. They saw exactly what they wanted to see. They saw a frightened daughter bending the knee to their extortion. Less than 3 minutes later, the screen of my phone illuminated. The notification banner displayed a new message from my mother. I reached out and tapped the glass to open the thread. Linda had not bothered to mask her triumph. Her response was a masterclass in smug condescension. "It is about time you started acting like a supportive sister, Fiona." Her text began. "Your father was absolutely furious with your disrespectful attitude this morning. You should be down on your knees thanking him for protecting your precious credit score. We will give you exactly 48 hours to process the vehicle transfer paperwork and hand the keys over to Ashley. Do not test our patience again. It is incredibly refreshing to see you finally learning your place in this family." I read the words twice, letting the sheer toxic entitlement wash over me without absorbing a single ounce of the intended emotional damage. Finally learning my place. The phrase was so perfectly aligned with their twisted worldview. My place was at the bottom of their hierarchy, serving as an endless financial resource to fund their delusions, while accepting their constant abuse with a grateful smile. They honestly believed they had broken me with a single threatening phone call. They thought the threat of a defaulted loan was a leash tight enough to control me forever. They were entirely oblivious to the fact that I held the keys to the kingdom and had just finished building the exact mechanism of their complete destruction. I did not reply to Linda's message. My silence would only fuel their false sense of victory, making them even more careless. I swiped out of the conversation thread, but before I could lock the device, a second notification pinged. This time it was from Ashley. Clearly, Linda and Harrison had immediately contacted their golden child to boast about their successful extortion attempt. Emboldened by my apparent surrender, Ashley decided it was the perfect time to extract her own pound of flesh. She saw an opportunity to capitalize on my supposed weakness, and she struck with the predatory instinct of a spoiled child who had never been told no. I opened Ashley's message. It was a massive block of text followed by a digital invoice attachment. Fiona, since Mom and Dad finally talked some sense into you, we need to discuss the wedding. Her message started with her typical grating blend of fake sweetness and absolute entitlement. I am willing to forgive your completely psycho behavior over the Tesla, but you have a lot of making up to do. The Christmas drama you caused severely impacted my mental health and threw my entire wedding planning schedule off track. I had to upgrade my floral arrangements to compensate for the extreme stress you caused me. I attached the invoice from the Manhattan designer. It is $15,000. You need to wire the money directly to the vendor by noon tomorrow. Consider it an apology tax for trying to ruin my engagement season. I opened the attached file and stared at the itemized list of imported orchids and rare exotic blooms. $15,000 for flowers that would die within 48 hours. She was demanding that I pay an apology tax for a car that she had tried to steal from me. The absolute disconnect from reality was breathtaking. Her entire lifestyle was financed by a fraudulent home equity line of credit and stolen identity, yet she was casually demanding another five-figure payout as if I were a limitless cash machine. She had no idea that the logistics company funding her illusion was functionally bankrupt. She was dancing on the deck of a sinking ship demanding more expensive champagne, while the hull was rapidly filling with icy water. I returned to the text thread to read the rest of her demands. The audacity only escalated. Also, we need to finalize the bridal party arrangements. Her message continued. I talked it over with Cameron and his family, and we have decided it is best if you are not one of my bridesmaids. His sisters are flying in from Europe, and they are accustomed to a certain level of high society elegance. Frankly, Fiona, you are just socially unfit for that kind of prestigious environment. You always look so stiff and awkward at formal events, and I cannot risk you embarrassing me in front of Cameron's wealthy relatives. I need my bridal party to look absolutely flawless for the luxury magazine features. I read the words socially unfit and felt a cold, sharp smile touch the corners of my mouth. She was echoing Linda's exact sentiments. She was projecting her own deep-seated insecurities onto me. Ashley was a woman whose entire existence was a carefully curated fraud. Terrified that her wealthy fiancé would discover she was nothing but a suburban imposter funded by corporate embezzlement and identity theft. I was not socially unfit. I was simply unwilling to participate in her exhausting pantomime. But she was not finished. She needed to ensure I remained in my designated role as the family scapegoat. Just because you are not in the bridal party does not mean you get to sit around doing nothing. Her text concluded. Since you are not paying for the venue, you can be my day of coordinator. I need someone to handle the vendor deliveries, manage the catering staff, and clean up the reception hall after Cameron and I leave for our honeymoon. You will need to wear something plain black so you blend in with the catering crew. I expect you at the venue at 6 in the morning sharp. Do not be late. She wanted to demote me to an unpaid servant. She wanted me to stand in the shadows wearing plain black handling garbage and sweeping floors, while she paraded around in custom couture funded by my stolen credit. It was the ultimate display of narcissistic dominance. She needed me there, not out of sisterly love, but to serve as a physical prop to elevate her own fragile ego. She wanted to look down from her pedestal and see me literally cleaning up her messes just as I had been expected to do my entire life. I closed the text thread. I did not feel hurt by the exclusion. I felt a profound sense of liberation. The last remaining threads of familial obligation snapped clean, leaving nothing but cold objective reality. They had shown me exactly who they were. They were parasites feeding on my stability. They were criminals who would happily destroy my future to preserve their fake status. I had given them every opportunity to be a family. They had chosen to be adversaries. I tapped the screen and opened the keyboard. I needed to send a final response. I needed to give them exactly enough rope to hang themselves completely. I typed a single, concise sentence. I will make sure everyone gets exactly what they deserve. I hit send. I did not wait for a reply. I powered down my personal phone and dropped it into my desk drawer. I severed my connection to their toxic world. I turned my attention back to the encrypted workstation. The comprehensive dossier was fully compiled, cross-referenced, and locked behind military-grade encryption. It contained the irrefutable proof of the $150,000 identity theft. It held the forensic breakdown of Harrison's massive commercial wire fraud. It exposed the fraudulent $2 million commercial expansion loan application. It was a digital guillotine, perfectly sharpened and ready to fall. I transferred the master file onto a secure biometric flash drive. I pulled the small silver device from the computer terminal and slipped it into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer. I shut down the workstation, plunging my home office into absolute silence. The time for gathering evidence was finally over. The time for execution had officially arrived. I walked out of my penthouse and took the private elevator down to the lobby. My driver successfully navigated the financial district with tremendous ease. The car pulled up to the imposing marble entrance of the regional bank headquarters. I stepped out onto the pavement, confidently adjusting the lapels of my blazer. I walked into the boardroom to personally meet the chief executive officer and the senior legal counsel. The boardroom was a cavernous space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the financial district. Marcus, the chief executive officer, sat at the far end with his hands steepled. To his immediate right sat Leo, the senior legal counsel. I did not bother with pleasantries. I placed my laptop on the table, connected the display to the projection screen, and entered my decryption keys. The room darkened automatically as my presentation illuminated the wall. I told them my firm had completed the commercial risk audit they had commissioned. I stated I had uncovered a systematic multi-million-dollar fraud operation originating from one of their oldest clients. I brought up the first slide displaying the logo of my father's logistics company. Marcus frowned deeply, stating Harrison had been a client for a decade and was considered a pillar of the community. I replied, Harrison was a parasite constructing a house of cards. I opened the commercial ledgers and walked them through the undeniable forensic evidence. I showed them the shell companies registered in Delaware. I highlighted the fabricated invoices and traced the corporate wire fraud. I demonstrated how Harrison was intentionally draining his operating accounts to artificially inflate expenses while funneling tax-free capital into his personal accounts. The logistics company was functionally bankrupt, operating on a massive deficit. I clicked to the next slide and brought up the $2 million commercial expansion loan application Harrison submitted 48 hours ago. I placed his submitted revenue reports beside the actual raw data extracted from his hidden ledgers. The numbers were completely fabricated. He was attempting to secure a massive federal banking loan using entirely fraudulent metrics. Leo leaned forward and removed his glasses. He asked if I could definitively prove Harrison orchestrated the application himself. I clicked to the next slide displaying the digital fingerprints. I matched Internet Protocol addresses and timestamps directly to Harrison's secure executive workstation. The trail was flawless, with absolutely no room for deniability. I then moved to the final section of my presentation, informing them that the corporate fraud had bled into the consumer side of the bank. I projected the home equity line of credit documents onto the screen, displaying the forged signature beside my actual legal signature. I showed the exact wire transfers, moving stolen funds from the equity account directly to pay off a massive consumer debt belonging to my sister. I explained Harrison had leveraged his failing company and stolen my identity to mask his impending financial collapse. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Leo stood up, practically vibrating with legal outrage. He informed Marcus that Harrison's actions crossed multiple boundaries into severe federal territory. They were looking at aggravated identity theft, intentional bank fraud, and systematic wire fraud across state lines. The liability to the regional bank was massive. If federal regulators discovered the bank processed a fraudulent home equity loan and considered a $2 million commercial loan based on fabricated revenue reports, the institution would face millions in compliance fines. Leo stated they needed to act immediately to mitigate the institutional risk, declaring they had to quarantine the threat before Harrison could move another dollar. Marcus nodded in absolute agreement, authorizing Leo to execute emergency protocols. Leo picked up the secure telephone and dialed the Internal Security and Compliance Division. I sat quietly and listened as the senior legal counsel ordered an immediate and total asset freeze on every single account associated with Harrison and his logistics company. The freeze encompassed the primary commercial operating accounts, the fraudulent shell company accounts, the compromised home equity line of credit, and all my parents' personal checking and savings accounts. The financial lockdown was absolute and instantaneous. Harrison was now completely severed from his money. He could not process payroll pay vendors or even buy a cup of coffee. The bank had dropped a massive steel cage around his entire financial existence. Leo turned back to me, asking how I managed to uncover the identity theft so quickly. I explained the notification letter automatically forwarded to my penthouse. Marcus rubbed his temples and sighed. He revealed a crucial piece of information that completely altered the situation. He told me Harrison was entirely unaware of the ongoing forensic audit. In fact, Harrison had been aggressively hounding the executive suite for 2 weeks, demanding expedited approval for the commercial loan. Marcus explained that Harrison had personally invited both him and Leo to a massive high society event taking place that upcoming weekend. It was a lavish gala celebrating the 30th anniversary of his logistics company, while simultaneously doubling as an extravagant engagement party for his younger daughter. Harrison had reserved the grand ballroom at the most exclusive luxury hotel in the city, inviting hundreds of local politicians, wealthy business owners, and influential socialites. Marcus revealed Harrison's arrogant underlying strategy. Harrison believed that if he cornered the bank executives in a room full of high society elites, they would be socially pressured into publicly finalizing the $2 million loan agreement. He planned to turn the signing into a centerpiece event at the gala, using the bank's money to prove his wealth and dominance to his future son-in-law's family. He thought he could manipulate the chief executive officer of a regional bank with cheap social pressure and a few glasses of imported champagne. The sheer level of narcissistic delusion was staggering. I looked at Marcus and Leo and told them Harrison had also demanded I attend this exact same event. I explained I had been ordered to act as an unpaid day of coordinator handling the catering staff and cleaning up trash to prove my obedience to the family. I proposed a synchronized strategy, suggesting we allow Harrison to continue believing his ridiculous illusion. I told Marcus and Leo to attend the gala exactly as requested. We would let Harrison gather his wealthy friends, his future in-laws, and his political connections in one giant room. We would let him stand on the stage and make his grandiose speeches about his brilliant business success. And then, in front of every single person he was trying to impress, we would execute the trap. We would not give him the $2 million lifeline. We would hand him the forensic audit report and formally notify him of the total asset freeze. We would let his house of cards collapse publicly and spectacularly. They agreed instantly. The bank needed to make a definitive statement that they did not tolerate federal fraud, and executing the confrontation publicly would shield the institution from any claims of backroom cover-ups. We spent the next 2 hours mapping out the precise logistics of the operation, synchronizing our timelines, and establishing secure communication channels for the night of the event. I provided Leo with all necessary digital copies of the audit, ensuring his legal team had everything required to process the formal default notices. When I finally walked out of the bank headquarters, the afternoon sun was beginning to set over the city. The trap was locked and fully loaded. All I had to do was play my designated role and wait for the curtain to rise. I spent the remainder of the week in total silence, ignoring the dozen text messages from my mother and sister demanding updates on the car transfer. I focused entirely on legitimate clients and let anticipation build. The morning of the gala arrived with a cold gray sky. I woke up at 5 in the morning. The city was still quiet and covered in a thick layer of shadows. I walked into my expansive closet and selected my attire for the day. Ashley had explicitly demanded that I wear something plain and black, so I would blend in perfectly with the catering staff and the background scenery. I chose a sharply tailored black designer suit, perfectly fitted and undeniably authoritative. It was the exact suit I wore when delivering devastating audit reports to hostile corporate boards. I was not dressing like a servant, I was dressing like an executioner. As I buttoned the crisp black silk blouse, my personal phone vibrated on the marble vanity counter. The screen illuminated the dark room with a harsh, glaring light. I walked over and picked up the device. The notification banner displayed a long text message from my mother. It was 6 in the morning. Linda was already awake and vibrating with toxic, entitled energy. She was ready to exert her dominance on what she believed would be the greatest triumphant day of her entire life. I unlocked the screen and opened the message, bracing myself for the final wave of her manufactured delusion before reality crashed down upon her. "I expect you at the venue in exactly 30 minutes, Fiona," her vicious text began. "You will enter through the rear loading dock with the rest of the hired help. Do not ever even think about using the main lobby." The screen of my smartphone illuminated the dimly lit office. The harsh blue light casting sharp shadows across the pages of the ledger spread before me. A new text notification from Linda pinged, cutting through the silence like a gunshot. I did not need to open the message to know what it said, but I tapped the glass regardless. "Don't bother coming tonight," it read. "You don't have the right clothes and Cameron's family is high society. We can't have you embarrassing us in front of the bank executives. Just drop the Tesla keys in the mailbox." Her words were as brittle and sharp as broken glass, perfectly reflecting the shallow vanity that had always defined her. I read the text once, then twice, feeling a strange, hollow sense of clarity. For years, I had craved the approval of this woman. My mother, who measured human worth by the label on a handbag or the prestige of an address. She had effectively told me I was a social liability, a stain on the carefully curated facade they had spent decades constructing. I set the phone face down on the mahogany desk, the device humming slightly with its own cold, detached energy. They had handed me the final justification I needed to dismantle their world. They were so drunk on their own hubris, so blinded by the glimmer of the upcoming $2 million loan, that they could not see the precipice they were standing on. They genuinely believed that by barring me from their gala, they were protecting their interests. They thought they were keeping the secret of their bankruptcy and fraud buried deep beneath the veneer of champagne and silk ties. They were wrong. They had not only misjudged my resolve, but they had also completely failed to understand the nature of the power I now wielded. I was not an embarrassed daughter looking for a seat at the table. I was the federal auditor who had meticulously calculated the cost of their sins, and I was coming to collect. The text from Linda was the final stinging insult that stripped away any remaining shred of sentimental hesitation. I stood up, feeling a cold, calm wind of purpose sweeping through my veins. The guilt that once prevented me from truly exposing them had completely evaporated, replaced by the icy, unyielding necessity of justice. I walked out of my office and toward the elevator, the quiet efficiency of the building matching my own internal state. I headed straight for the city's premier luxury district, a place where money was not just a currency, but a shield. I entered a boutique that catered specifically to the city's elite, the kind of establishment where discretion was as highly valued as the silk on the racks. The sales associate approached with a practiced, welcoming smile, her eyes assessing my presence with the effortless ease of someone accustomed to handling high-net-worth individuals. I ignored the racks of vibrant colors and intricate patterns. I was looking for something specific, something that communicated absolute finality. I bypassed the trends of the season and focused on a collection of evening wear that leaned into minimalism and structural precision. I eventually settled on a floor-length gown that was a masterpiece of architectural design. It was midnight black, the fabric heavy, rich, and possessing a slight sheen that looked like dark water under the store's bright lights. It did not have sequins lace or excessive beading. It was sharp, cold, and undeniably formidable. It was not a dress for a party. It was a shroud. I went into the fitting room and pulled the garment over my head. As the fabric settled against my skin, the transformation was almost visceral. I looked at my reflection and saw a stranger, a woman who possessed the calm, terrifying poise of a judge preparing to deliver a life-altering verdict. I was not going to the gala to participate in their celebration of 30 years of lies. I was going to serve as the silent witness to their final public unraveling. I purchased the dress without hesitation, adding a pair of simple diamond studs that matched the cold, icy precision of the audit report currently sitting in my secure drive. I walked out of the store into the late afternoon sun, feeling like a weapon that had finally been drawn from its scabbard. The phone in my bag chimed again, a more urgent, persistent ringtone. I pulled it out to see Leo, the bank's senior legal counsel, calling. The gravity of the situation was evident in his tone the moment he answered. Fiona, the freeze orders have been finalized, and the court has issued the emergency injunctions across all of Harrison's commercial accounts and his primary personal holdings, Leo said, his voice echoing with suppressed fury. We have notified the federal authorities. The wire fraud evidence you provided is more than enough for them to secure an immediate arrest warrant for your father. There was a pause, and he added, We are officially cutting ties with the company effective immediately. The bank wants no association with this level of criminal enterprise. I stood on the sidewalk watching the traffic flow by, feeling the weight of the city settling into a sudden quiet stillness. The work of 6 months had finally converged into this singular, inevitable outcome. I asked Leo what the plan was for the gala. He replied that he and the CEO Marcus would still be attending. They wanted to maintain the ruse until the final moment, ensuring that the evidence was incontrovertible and that the confrontation would happen with as many witnesses as possible. They wanted Harrison to believe he had secured the lifeline loan, to let him enjoy the champagne and the speeches, only to have the ground vanish beneath him while he stood on the stage. It was a ruthless, efficient maneuver, exactly what the bank required to protect its reputation from the fallout of their client's massive orchestrated fraud. Leo then lowered his voice, his tone shifting from professional to personal. Fiona, he said, this is going to be incredibly difficult for you to witness. You are going to be standing there while we dismantle your family's history in front of their entire social circle. I have been through many corporate collapses, but never one where a daughter was the primary investigator. Do you really want to be present when the news is delivered? I closed my eyes, picturing the gala, the lights, the laughter, the champagne, the arrogant faces of my mother and sister as they preened for the cameras. I thought about the forged signature on the HELOC document. I thought about the $2 million loan application built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated greed. I thought about the way my mother had dismissed me and how my sister had demanded I serve as a janitor at her engagement party. I opened my eyes, the city lights beginning to blur as the sun finally dipped below the horizon. I wouldn't miss this for the world, I replied, my voice steady and devoid of doubt. It was never about the money, and it was never about the car. It was about the truth, and the truth is the only currency that matters tonight. Meet me at the front doors. I ended the call and stood for a moment, letting the finality of the decision wash over me. The path back was closed. There was no going back to the life of the daughter who stayed silent, the daughter who allowed herself to be diminished to maintain the peace. I was stepping into the truth regardless of the destruction it left in its wake. I returned to my apartment to complete the final preparations. I opened the folder labeled Duyan Mao 1_16.docx, which contained the preliminary internal compliance reports. I compared the data there against the final audit I had completed. Every piece of information aligned perfectly with the documents in Duyan Mao 2_16.docx, which detailed the shell company transactions. The consistency of the evidence in Duyan Mao 3_16.docx was crucial for the federal investigators, and I took one final look at the summary in Duyanmao 4_16.docx, which outlined the specific federal statutes my father had violated. It was all there. I wasn't guessing. I wasn't speculating. I was the architect of his demise. I dressed with careful, intentional slowness, the midnight black gown feeling like a second skin. It was an armor of my own construction, a testament to the fact that I had not been broken, but forged. The taxi pulled up to the luxury hotel where the gala was being held, the grand entrance draped in opulent banners and shimmering lights. The valet line was packed with the city's elite cars idling as people in their finest attire stepped out oblivious to the fact that they were attending a funeral for a corporate empire. I stepped out of the taxi, the cold air hitting my face, and adjusted my shawl. I didn't head for the loading dock as Linda had demanded. I walked straight for the front entrance, my head high, my posture unwavering. I saw Marcus and Leo waiting near the massive velvet ropes that cordoned off the entrance. They were in conversation with a security guard, their expressions grim and focused. When Marcus saw me, he nodded a silent acknowledgement of the storm we were about to unleash. I walked toward them, the click of my heels against the pavement sounding like the steady ticking of a clock counting down to 0. The lobby beyond the glass was bathed in a soft golden glow, filled with the murmur of polite conversation and the clinking of glasses. My father was inside, likely shaking hands and calculating how to spend the $2 million he was certain he would extract from the bank executives. He was standing on the stage of his own creation, blind to the fact that the platform was already splintering. I stopped beside Marcus and Leo, the three of us standing like sentinels at the gates. "Everything is ready," Leo whispered, his gaze scanning the lobby. "The federal agents are waiting in the wings. Once we serve the notice and the accounts are frozen, they will move in." I checked my reflection in the glass of the front doors. I saw no fear, only an absolute terrifying calm. This was the moment I had built toward for half a year. I had allowed them to believe they had successfully manipulated me, allowed them to think I was still the daughter who could be bullied into submission. Now they would discover that the quiet accountant they had discarded was the one who held the power to destroy them. The doors opened and the warmth of the gala rushed out to meet us, smelling of lilies and expensive perfume. I took a deep breath, ready to face the music, and stepped forward. This was the end of the illusion, the moment the guillotine finally dropped, and I would be there to watch every second of it. My father stood near the main staircase, laughing at a joke made by a city councilman, the picture of a man who believed he was untouchable. He didn't see me yet. He didn't see the auditor standing in his doorway. He didn't see the end of his life as he knew it. But he would. Very, very soon. A sharp chime of crystal being tapped drew the attention of every single guest in the grand ballroom. Harrison excused himself from the city councilman and strode purposefully toward the elevated stage positioned at the far end of the room. He took the silver microphone with practiced ease, his chest puffed out with the supreme confidence of a man entirely disconnected from reality. The ballroom itself was a masterclass in financial gluttony. Cascading floral arrangements dripped from the ceiling, matching the $15,000 invoice Ashley had demanded I pay just hours prior. Waitstaff in crisp white tuxedos glided flawlessly through the packed crowd, balancing silver trays loaded with imported caviar and crystal flutes bubbling with vintage champagne. The guest list represented a curated collection of the city's most influential figures. Local politicians, wealthy business tycoons, and prominent socialites mingled effortlessly beneath the towering chandeliers. Seated at the premier tables directly in front of the stage was Cameron's family. They were the epitome of generational wealth, projecting an aura of quiet, intimidating luxury that Ashley was so desperate to emulate. They watched my father with polite, calculated interest, completely unaware the lavish spectacle was funded by corporate embezzlement and stolen credit. Harrison adjusted his silk tie and smiled warmly at his captive audience. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," he began, his voice echoing richly through the state-of-the-art sound system. 30 years ago, I started this logistics company with nothing but a singular vision and an unwavering commitment to integrity. Tonight, we celebrate more than just a corporate anniversary. We celebrate a family legacy. We celebrate the kind of unbreakable wealth that can only be built through honest business and sheer determination. I stand before you not just as a successful chief executive officer, but as a proud father. He continued gesturing generously toward the VIP section where Ashley sat glowing under the attention. Tonight, we also celebrate the engagement of my beautiful daughter Ashley to Cameron, a young man from a truly remarkable family. I stood in the shadows just outside the main double doors, listening to him weave his elaborate web of deception. He was laying the psychological groundwork to publicly strong-arm Marcus and Leo into signing the $2 million commercial loan. By tying his business success to his future son-in-law's high society family, he was trying to corner the bank executives into approving his financial request. I glanced to my left, where Leo stood with his arms crossed, his jaw tightly clenched. Marcus stood to my right, his expression utterly devoid of emotion. They had heard enough. I gave them a single sharp nod. I stepped forward and firmly pushed open the towering mahogany double doors. The heavy hinges swung inward silently, but the visual impact of our entrance was immediate and devastating. I walked into the ballroom, commanding the space with absolute authority. The midnight black designer gown flowed around me, projecting an aura of cold, unyielding power. I did not look like the subservient scapegoat they had expected to find hiding in the service corridors. I looked like an executioner arriving to collect a long overdue debt. Leo and Marcus flanked me, their presence adding massive institutional weight to my arrival. The guests nearest the entrance turned to look, and a sudden ripple of hushed whispers began to spread rapidly through the crowd. The conversation died down as people noticed the chief executive officer and the senior legal counsel escorting me. The crowd naturally parted before us, creating a wide, unobstructed path directly down the center of the ballroom. Harrison was still speaking into the microphone, completely oblivious to the shifting atmosphere at the back of the venue. But Linda and Ashley were not on the stage. They were stationed near the front tables, monitoring the room like hawks. I saw the exact second my mother registered my presence. Her champagne flute froze halfway to her mouth. Her eyes widened in absolute shock before narrowing into slits of pure venomous rage. She violently tapped Ashley's arm, pointing directly at me. Ashley whipped her head around, and her jaw visibly dropped. She took in the sight of my stunning gown, the confident stride, and the two powerful banking executives walking beside me. The color drained completely from her face before being rapidly replaced by a dark, angry flush. This was not the narrative she had scripted. I was supposed to be wearing plain black slacks, sweeping the floors and managing the catering staff out of sight. I was not supposed to be stopping the high society gala dead in its tracks. Without missing a beat, Linda and Ashley abandoned their VIP tables and aggressively intercepted us halfway down the center aisle. They moved with frantic, desperate energy, eager to contain the situation before it reached the stage. They threw themselves directly into our path, physically blocking my progression toward Harrison. "Fiona, what on earth do you think you are doing?" Linda hissed, her voice a low, frantic whisper. "I told you specifically not to show your face in the main ballroom tonight. You are entirely out of line." Ashley stepped directly in front of me, her eyes blazing with furious entitlement. "What are you doing here?" Ashley hissed, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "I told you to go find another table or leave. This section is for VIPs, not tech support dropouts. You are going to ruin my engagement party. Who do you think you are trying to embarrass us in front of the bank executives and Cameron's family?" I stopped walking and looked at her. I simply stared at her with cold, objective detachment. I looked at the imported floral centerpieces towering over the tables. I looked at the diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. I looked at the crystal champagne flutes clutched in the hands of the wealthy guests surrounding us. Every single item in the room was paid for with stolen money. Every single aspect of her luxurious lifestyle was a direct result of my stolen identity and Harrison's massive corporate embezzlement. She called me a tech support dropout. She still believed I was a low-level representative, failing to grasp that I was the senior auditor who disassembled her fraudulent existence. She had absolutely no idea she was speaking to the person holding the digital detonator to her entire life. Leo shifted his weight beside me, his presence a looming threat. He looked at Linda and Ashley with unmasked professional disgust. Marcus remained silent, watching the interaction. They were letting me lead the confrontation exactly as we had planned. I reached into the hidden pocket of my gown and withdrew a sealed manila envelope. Inside the envelope was a comprehensive summary of the forensic audit. It contained the exact transaction logs showing how Harrison had forged my signature on the home equity line of credit. It contained the irrefutable evidence of the corporate wire fraud and the fake commercial expansion loan application. I held the envelope out, extending it directly toward my sister. Ashley looked at the thick paper package with a mixture of profound confusion and rising dread. Her eyes darted from the envelope to my face, searching for any sign of weakness or hesitation. She found absolutely nothing but glacial resolve. "Take it," I said, my voice perfectly level, carrying easily over the muted whispers of the surrounding crowd. She hesitated, her hand trembling slightly as she reached out and snatched the envelope from my grasp. She held it against her chest as if the paper itself might burn her. She opened her mouth to launch another vicious verbal assault, to command me to leave the room. I did not give her the opportunity to speak. I smiled coldly, locking eyes with her. "Open this when you want your reality check," I said, my words slicing cleanly through the heavy tension of the ballroom. Linda gasped quietly, taking a half step backward as the absolute certainty in my voice finally registered. She looked at Marcus and Leo, finally recognizing the severe institutional power standing by my side. She realized in that exact moment that this was not a family dispute. This was a highly coordinated professional execution. I did not wait for Ashley to process the warning. I did not care if she opened the envelope now or later. The contents were already a matter of federal record. The local authorities had already received the full digital dossier, and the regional bank had already frozen every single financial asset tied to the Harrison name. The envelope was simply a courtesy notification informing her that the lavish party was officially over. I stepped forward and forced my sister and mother to move aside. I walked past them, leaving them standing frozen in the center aisle, clutching the documentation of their own destruction. I continued my deliberate march toward the stage where my father was still blindly delivering his deeply pompous speech. My footsteps muffled by the thick, luxurious carpet of the grand ballroom, but carrying the rhythmic weight of a ticking clock. The sea of highly influential guests parted seamlessly before me, their initial polite murmurs transforming into a heavy, suffocating silence. Wealthy socialites, influential politicians, and corporate titans practically held their breath, their eyes darting between my severe midnight black designer gown and the two incredibly powerful banking executives flanking my sides. The sheer visual contrast was jarring. This was supposed to be a night of champagne toasts and glittering celebrations of unparalleled success. Instead, the atmosphere had abruptly chilled, taking on the stark, unforgiving tension of a federal courtroom just before a devastating verdict is read aloud. I did not look back at my mother and sister, who were left completely frozen in the center aisle, their desperate attempts at interception entirely dismantled by their own creeping dread. I kept my gaze locked squarely on the man standing under the brilliant glare of the stage spotlights. Harrison was still holding the silver microphone, a plastic smile plastered across his perfectly tanned face. He had been mid-sentence weaving an elaborate tapestry of corporate lies and fabricated family loyalty when the shifting energy of the room finally penetrated his colossal ego. He paused, blinking against the harsh stage lighting, his brow furrowing as he tried to decipher why his captive audience was suddenly captivated by a disruption at the rear of the hall. His eyes scanned the parted crowd and skipped entirely over me. In his deeply narcissistic mind, I was invisible, relegated to the role of the unseen help, expected to be dressed in plain clothes to blend into the shadows and manage the catering staff. Instead, his greedy vision locked exclusively onto the two men walking resolutely by my side. He saw Marcus, the chief executive officer of the regional bank, holding the keys to his desperately needed $2 million commercial expansion loan. He saw Leo, the senior legal counsel, whose signature was required to authorize the massive transfer of federal funds. Harrison's face instantly lit up with a brilliant predatory gleam, his mind completely detached from the reality of his own criminal exposure, interpreted their arrival as the ultimate validation of his fraudulent empire. He genuinely believed that the top brass of the financial institution had personally arrived at his 30th anniversary gala to publicly bless his enterprise and deliver the capital that would save him from ruin. He puffed out his chest, adjusting his expensive silk tie, and raised the microphone back to his lips. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice dripping with unbearable arrogance, "it appears we have some incredibly special guests joining us tonight. Please direct your attention to the center aisle and welcome the visionary leadership of our primary financial partners." He extended a magnanimous hand toward the floor. "Marcus Leo, please come up to the stage and join me in celebrating this monumental milestone." The sheer audacity of his invitation hung in the stagnant air of the ballroom, thick and cloying. He stood there on the elevated platform, holding his hand out like a benevolent king, graciously allowing his subjects to share in his glorious spotlight. He expected them to eagerly climb the velvet-lined steps, shake his hand for the cameras, and validate his existence in front of his wealthy future in-laws. He expected a grand, highly publicized coronation. What he received was absolute freezing rejection. Marcus stopped walking the moment he reached the perimeter of the VIP seating area, planting his feet firmly on the custom flooring. He did not smile. He did not wave. He simply stared up at Harrison with the cold, dead eyes of a man evaluating a particularly unappealing liability. Leo stepped forward, stopping precisely at the base of the stairs leading up to the stage. The senior legal counsel did not accept the invitation to ascend. Instead, he slowly and deliberately crossed his arms over his chest, his posture rigid and unyielding. The room grew so quiet that the faint clinking of ice in crystal glasses sounded like breaking glass. Harrison's confident smile faltered, a brief flicker of genuine confusion crossing his features. He lowered his extended hand, unsure of how to process the blatant public disrespect from the men he was trying to manipulate. Leo did not say a single word. He simply shifted his weight, turned his head slightly, and extended his right hand in a sharp, formal gesture, directing the attention of the entire ballroom entirely to me. I stepped past the two executives and placed my foot on the first velvet-covered stair. The rustle of my heavy silk gown was the only sound in the cavernous space. I ascended the stairs with deliberate, measured precision, feeling the collective gaze of hundreds of the city's most powerful people burning into my back. As I crested the stage and stepped into the blinding warmth of the spotlights, I finally entered my father's field of vision. Harrison stared at me, his eyes widening in shock as his brain struggled to process my presence. I was not wearing the plain black uniform of the catering staff he had ordered me to wear. I was wearing a masterpiece of architectural design that commanded absolute authority, my demeanor radiating a terrifying, icy calm. He took a tiny, involuntary step backward, the plastic smile completely sliding off his face, to reveal the panicked, hollow man hiding beneath the tailored suit. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a vicious, panicked hiss intended only for my ears. "What the hell do you think you are doing up here, Fiona? Get off this stage immediately before you ruin everything." I did not blink. I did not flinch. I did not acknowledge his pathetic attempt to exert control over a situation he had already entirely lost. I stepped directly into his personal space, reaching out with a steady, unwavering hand, and simply took the silver microphone from his suddenly weakened grip. He was so deeply shocked by my blatant insubordination that he actually let go, his fingers slipping away from the metal casing as if he had been burned. I turned my back to him, facing the sprawling expanse of the grand ballroom. I looked out over the sea of upturned faces, scanning the rows of elegantly dressed guests. I saw Cameron's family sitting in the premier front row seats, their expressions a mixture of aristocratic confusion and rising alarm. I saw Linda and Ashley still standing paralyzed in the center aisle, their faces drained of all color, clutching the manila envelope containing the forensic proof of their impending destruction. I brought the microphone to my lips. The sound system amplified my breathing, sending a sharp, commanding echo through the room. My father talks a lot about generational wealth. I began, my voice ringing out with crystal clear articulation, devoid of any emotional tremor. The guests leaned in, hanging on every single syllable. He talks about family legacy, unbreakable bonds, and the virtues of honest business. He loves to paint a picture of unparalleled success, standing on this stage and demanding your respect. I paused, letting the silence stretch out, heightening the unbearable tension in the room. I shifted my gaze directly to the table where Cameron's parents sat. So much so I continued my tone, dropping to a conversational, almost mocking cadence, that for Christmas this year he tried to gift my sister a $72,000 Tesla that I purchased with my own money, using my own credit and maintaining my own insurance. A collective audible gasp rippled through the grand ballroom. The sophisticated veneer of the high society crowd shattered instantly, replaced by unfiltered shock and scandalous whispers. Cameron's mother visibly recoiled, dropping her hand from the table and turning to stare at Ashley with undisguised horror. The illusion of the wealthy, successful family they were marrying into had just sustained a massive, fatal crack. "But that is just petty theft," I stated, my voice slicing effortlessly through the rising murmur of the crowd. "That is just the pathetic, desperate action of a man trying to maintain an illusion for people he desperately wants to impress." Behind me, the sheer magnitude of the public humiliation finally penetrated Harrison's thick skull. The shock evaporated instantly, replaced by a blinding, uncontrollable rage. He realized his entire carefully constructed world was disintegrating in real time. He lunged forward, his face contorted in a mask of violent fury, his hands reaching out to grab my shoulder and physically rip the microphone from my grasp. I did not even bother to turn around. Before his fingers could graze the fabric of my gown, a massive wall of black-suited bodies materialized between us. Leo had not come to the gala unprepared. He snapped his fingers, a sharp, commanding sound that cut through the noise. The venue security team, highly trained professionals who clearly understood that the senior legal counsel of the region's largest bank carried infinitely more authority than a failing logistics owner, moved with terrifying speed. Three large men intercepted Harrison mid-lunge. They formed an impenetrable human barricade, physically restraining my father and pushing him backward. Harrison thrashed against their grip, his face purple with rage, sputtering incoherent threats and demanding they release him immediately. He was completely trapped, humiliated, and physically contained on the very stage where he had intended to crown himself king. He was no longer the powerful chief executive officer hosting a lavish anniversary gala. He was a cornered criminal throwing a violent tantrum in front of the entire city elite. The guests watched in absolute stunned silence as the wealthy businessman they had been applauding moments ago was reduced to a struggling, red-faced spectacle. I ignored the chaotic scuffle entirely, maintaining my position at the front of the stage with unwavering poise. I did not look at the security guards handling my father, nor did I look at the sobbing, hyperventilating mess my sister had become in the center aisle. My focus was absolute, my objective crystal clear. I turned my attention deliberately and exclusively to the VIP tables situated in the very front row. I locked eyes with Marcus, the chief executive officer of the bank, and Leo, the senior legal counsel, who had orchestrated the immediate and total freeze of every single financial asset tied to the Harrison name. The regional directors and senior compliance officers seated around them watched me with rapt professional intensity. They knew exactly what was coming. They were waiting for the final strike, the public validation of the massive forensic audit I had delivered to their boardroom earlier that afternoon. I raised the microphone one last time, my voice echoing with the cold, devastating finality of a gavel dropping in a silent courtroom. Let's talk about the real theft. The $150,000 forged HELOC and the $2 million commercial loan. The silence that followed my words was absolute. It was the kind of total vacuum that occurs right before a shockwave levels a city block. I looked down at the sea of pale faces. The local elite, the politicians, the wealthy investors, they all stared back at me with expressions of mounting horror. I let the weight of those numbers settle over them. $150,000 stolen from a family member to mask failing operational costs. $2 million requested from a federally insured institution using entirely fabricated revenue ledgers. I paced slowly across the stage, the black silk of my gown trailing behind me like a shadow. For years, this man has stood before you, presenting himself as a titan of industry. He has sold you a narrative of flawless success and unyielding integrity. He has hosted lavish parties, sponsored charity events, and courted the finest families in the city. But it is all a carefully constructed lie. I stopped center stage, looking directly down at the security guards, struggling to hold my father back. He was no longer shouting. He was panting heavily, his face a mask of primal panic. For those of you in this room who only know me as Harrison's quiet, disappointing daughter, the one routinely hidden away from his high society events, allow me to formally reintroduce myself. I am Fiona. I am the lead forensic auditor and the chief executive officer of my own independent financial investigation firm. I was the principal architect of the commercial risk audit commissioned directly by Marcus and Leo. I am the person who spent the last 6 months disassembling this logistics company transaction by transaction, lie by lie. A collective gasp shuddered through the ballroom. I watched the realization wash over the faces of the bank executives seated in the front row. They knew I was an auditor, but hearing the brutal family dynamic laid bare added a sickening new layer to the corporate fraud. I turned away from the crowd and walked toward the edge of the stage right above where my father was being physically restrained. I reached into the hidden pocket of my gown and withdrew 2 crisp white envelopes bearing the official embossed seal of the regional bank. I held them up so the stage lights caught the gold foil. "These are not ceremonial awards," I stated, my voice projecting clearly over the sound system. "This first document is the formal absolute rejection of your $2 million commercial expansion loan. The revenue reports you submitted 48 hours ago were cross-referenced with your hidden ledgers. The bank is fully aware that your logistics company is functionally bankrupt, operating on a massive deficit, and drowning in toxic debt." I tossed the envelope. It fluttered down and landed directly at his feet. He stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. I held up the second envelope. "This document is your notice of immediate and total asset freezing. As of 3 o'clock this afternoon, every single commercial operating account, every hidden shell company account, your compromised home equity line of credit, and all personal checking and savings accounts have been entirely locked down by federal authorities. You cannot process payroll. You cannot pay your vendors. You cannot access a single cent. The financial lockdown is absolute." I dropped the second envelope. It landed squarely on top of the first. "You are completely severed from your money." I turned away from his horrified face and looked back out at the audience. The absolute shock had begun to wear off, replaced by a frantic rising tide of self-preservation. In the center aisle, the scene I had orchestrated was reaching its devastating climax. Cameron, a young man accustomed to the insulated safety of generational wealth, was staring at Ashley with wide, uncomprehending eyes. He had been promised a merger of 2 powerful empires. He had been told he was marrying into a logistics dynasty with unlimited resources and pristine social standing. Now he was listening to the bride's sister publicly declare the family completely bankrupt and under federal investigation. Cameron stepped away from his parents and demanded answers. "What is she talking about, Ashley?" he said, his voice loud enough to carry to the stage. "What does she mean the company is bankrupt? What is in that envelope she gave you?" Ashley was hyperventilating. Her perfectly styled hair was beginning to frizz around her face, and her hands shook violently as she clutched the manila envelope I had handed her moments earlier. "Open it," I commanded from the stage, my voice slicing through the rising murmur of the ballroom. "Open it right now, and show your future husband the reality of your flawless family legacy." Linda lunged forward, trying to snatch the envelope out of her daughter's hands. "Do not open that, Ashley!" Linda shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "It is a trick. She is just trying to humiliate us. Give it to me." But Ashley was too panicked. She yanked the envelope away from her mother, her perfectly manicured nails tearing frantically at the heavy paper seal. She ripped it open, and a thick stack of financial documents spilled out into her hands. They were the raw, unedited forensic summaries. They contained the true balance sheets, the negative profit margins, the extensive lists of unpaid creditors, and the staggering reality of their absolute destitution. Ashley stared at the top page, her eyes scanning the bold red numbers detailing their total insolvency. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll that had just cracked down the center. There was a specific section highlighted in bright yellow ink. It outlined the funding for this very engagement party and the upcoming wedding. It clearly stated that the vendors, the venue, the caterers, and the florists were all entirely unfunded, relying on the massive commercial loan that had just been publicly denied. Cameron stepped closer, ignoring Linda, who was frantically trying to step between them. He reached out and snatched the documents directly from Ashley's trembling hands. He did not need to be a forensic auditor to read a simple balance sheet. He was a businessman raised by a family of ruthless corporate sharks. His eyes darted across the pages, absorbing the horrifying truth in mere seconds. He saw the empty trust fund accounts. He saw the heavily leveraged properties. He saw the sheer magnitude of the financial ruin he was about to marry into. He looked up from these papers, his face a mask of pure revulsion. He looked at Ashley, taking in the expensive diamond necklace she wore, the designer gown, and the lavish floral arrangements surrounding them. He realized instantly that every single piece of her glamorous identity was a complete fabrication paid for with stolen money and empty promises. He realized he was not marrying an heiress. He was marrying a severe financial liability entirely devoid of any actual social status. Ashley tried to reach for him, tears finally spilling over her mascara. "Cameron, please," she begged, her voice a desperate whine. "I did not know. I swear I did not know it was this bad. We can fix it. My dad can fix it." Cameron stepped back as if her touch would infect him with her bankruptcy. His parents had already stood up from their VIP table, their faces carved from stone, signaling the absolute end of the alliance. Cameron looked at Ashley, and the illusion shattered permanently. "You lied to me about everything," he stated, his voice cold hard and utterly devoid of any remaining affection. He did not wait for an explanation. He did not look at Linda, who was now weeping openly into her hands. Cameron simply opened his fingers. The crystal champagne flute he had been holding throughout the entire ordeal slipped from his grasp. It hit the marble floor with a sharp, violently loud crash, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces. The sound echoed through the deathly quiet ballroom, a perfect auditory punctuation to the end of their relationship. He turned his back on Ashley, adjusting his suit jacket with practiced elegance, and walked straight down the center aisle, heading directly for the exit. His parents followed close behind him, their heads held high, refusing to look at the wreckage of the Harrison family. Ashley let out a piercing, dramatic wail, collapsing onto her knees amidst the shattered glass and discarded financial documents. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, as the reality of her ruined engagement and evaporated social standing finally crushed her completely. Linda dropped down beside her, wrapping her arms around her ruined golden child, offering empty comforts that could not pay a single federal fine. From the stage, I watched them fall. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. I felt only the clean, sharp satisfaction of a ledger finally balanced. But the destruction was not contained to the center aisle. The shockwave of my audit report was rapidly spreading through the rest of the ballroom. The local politicians, the wealthy investors, and the influential socialites who had been applauding my father minutes ago were suddenly calculating their own exposure. These were people who had invested in his supply chain, who had partnered with him on regional distribution deals, who had extended him personal lines of credit based on his flawless reputation. They had just heard a federal auditor confirm that the entire enterprise was a criminal fraud. The panic was immediate and infectious. I watched as a prominent city developer stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. He pulled his cell phone from his breast pocket, his face pale with sudden fear. Across the room, a pair of logistics contractors abandoned their half-eaten caviar and rushed toward the side exits, arguing frantically in hushed tones. The initial trickle of departing guests rapidly escalated into a full-blown exodus. Harrison's business partners were leaving their tables en masse. The grand ballroom transformed from a luxurious celebration into a chaotic evacuation zone. Dozens of highly influential men and women were furiously dialing their own legal counsels, their accountants, and their crisis management teams. They needed to sever ties, isolate their assets, and protect their own wealth from the massive federal fallout that was about to consume the Harrison Logistics Company. The sound of hundreds of panicked voices trying to whisper simultaneously created a deafening roar. I stood on the stage holding the microphone, watching the empire burn. The bank executives in the front row remained seated, their expressions grimly satisfied by the sheer efficiency of the execution. The trap had sprung flawlessly. The illusion was dead. The reality of their crimes was now public, undeniable, and permanently recorded in the minds of the city's most powerful people. I lowered the microphone and took a slow, deep breath, letting the sweet air of absolute victory fill my lungs. The entire structure of lies had collapsed precisely as I calculated, leaving nothing but the absolute truth in its wake. The silence in the grand ballroom was entirely broken now, replaced by a chaotic symphony of destruction. Linda stumbled backward, as if struck by a physical blow, her knees buckling beneath her. She collapsed heavily into a gold-gilded banquet chair, her hands flying to her face. She was not crying for the crimes committed or the family she had alienated. She was wailing for the death of her social reputation. Her sobs were loud and theatrical, echoing with the terrifying realization that she would never again be invited to another country club luncheon or society gala. She was instantly a pariah in the city she worshipped. Ashley scrambled to her feet, the shredded financial documents still scattered around her designer shoes. Her face was a twisted mask of desperation and unfiltered hatred. She pointed a trembling finger at the stage, her voice screeching over the noise of fleeing guests. "You ruined my life," she screamed, her vocal cords straining. "You ruined my engagement and my party and everything I ever wanted. You did this to me on purpose because you are a jealous, vindictive sociopath." I stood at the edge of the stage, looking down at the two women who had made my existence an absolute misery for 30 years. My posture remained flawless, my expression entirely devoid of sympathy. I raised the microphone one final time, my voice cutting through Ashley's hysterical screaming with chilling precision. "For my entire life, you told me I needed to learn independence. You told me I needed to stop relying on this family and carve out my own path. I let those words resonate, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and the mahogany walls. Well, I learned it. I learned how to stand on my own 2 feet. I learned how to build a company that actually generates legitimate revenue." I paused, letting my gaze sweep over the pathetic figures of my mother and sister before locking onto my father. I also learned how to press charges. I lowered the microphone and handed it off to Leo, who received it with a grim nod of profound respect. The regional bank executives were already moving toward the exits, their objective completely achieved. They had protected their institution and publicly severed ties with a massive liability. Now it was time for my final personal transaction. I descended the velvet stairs, moving with unhurried grace. The remaining guests scrambled out of my path, pressing themselves against the walls to avoid any proximity to the Harrison family fallout. I walked directly to where my father was still pinned by the massive event security guards. His expensive tuxedo jacket was twisted, his face pale and slick with panicked sweat. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a sudden, desperate realization that his manipulation tactics were entirely useless. "Fiona, please," he begged, his voice a hoarse whisper. "We can fix this. I am your father. You cannot send me to prison." I reached into the small black clutch I had carried into the room and retrieved a thick, precisely folded legal document. It was not a bank notice. It was a formal civil lawsuit detailing the aggravated identity theft, the forged home equity line of credit, and the systematic financial abuse he had perpetrated against his own daughter. I did not speak to him. He no longer deserved my words. I simply dropped the heavy legal packet directly onto his chest. He flinched as it hit him, the papers sliding down his ruined jacket and landing on the floor beside his feet. I turned my back on Harrison, turning my back on Linda and Ashley, and walked straight down the center aisle. The heavy mahogany double doors stood open, framing the cool night air of the city. As I crossed the threshold of the ballroom, a new sound began to filter through the grand lobby. It was faint at first, but rapidly growing louder. The high, piercing wail of police sirens cutting through the downtown traffic. The federal authorities were arriving to execute the arrest warrants. I walked past the concierge desk, through the glass revolving doors, and out into the crisp evening, feeling the immense, crushing weight of 30 years finally lift from my shoulders. The empire was gone. I was free. 6 months passed, transforming the landscape of my life and completely obliterating theirs. The fallout from the gala was absolute and unforgiving. Harrison's logistics company was immediately seized by federal regulators. The forensic audit I provided served as the foundational blueprint for the prosecution, mapping out every single fraudulent transaction, shell company, and hidden ledger. The business was aggressively liquidated, its assets sold off for pennies on the dollar to appease a seemingly endless list of furious creditors. Harrison and Linda were currently facing a multitude of severe federal fraud charges. The legal fees required to mount even a basic defense were astronomical, completely draining whatever legitimate funds they had managed to scrape together. They were forced to sell the sprawling suburban mansion, the luxury vehicles, and the imported jewelry. They had moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, a space entirely devoid of the opulence they had once hoarded. Their social circle had evaporated overnight. The wealthy friends they had courted, the politicians they had bribed, and the country club elite they had worshipped completely cut them off. They were toxic pariahs living in a quiet, desperate isolation of their own making. Ashley's pristine influencer lifestyle imploded with spectacular speed. Without the endless flow of stolen corporate funds to finance her designer wardrobe, her luxury vacations, and her high society aesthetic, her followers vanished. Her engagement to Cameron was permanently canceled, the wealthy family threatening legal action if she ever attempted to contact them again. Stripped of her credit cards and her artificial status, Ashley was forced into a reality she had spent her entire life mocking. She currently worked a minimum-wage retail job at a local mall, folding clothes and ringing up customers to pay off the massive personal debts she had accumulated. There were no VIP tables for her anymore, only long shifts and the crushing realization of her own mediocrity. Conversely, my life had ascended to heights I had only ever dreamed of. The public exposure of the Harrison fraud had an unexpected but completely welcome side effect. The business community recognized the absolute precision, ruthlessness, and unyielding integrity of my audit. The reputation of my financial investigation firm skyrocketed overnight. Corporations, banks, and elite investment groups clamored for my services, eager to hire the auditor who had fearlessly dismantled her own corrupt family empire. I was turning down lucrative contracts simply because I did not have the hours in the day to accept them all. I had expanded my team, moved into a premier downtown office suite, and established myself as the most formidable financial investigator in the region. The late afternoon sun was warm as I exited my office building, my heels clicking softly against the pavement. I walked into the private parking garage and approached my pristine midnight silver Tesla. It was the exact $72,000 vehicle my mother had demanded I surrender to my sister. The car gleamed under the garage lights, a flawless testament to my independence and hard work. I unlocked the doors and slid into the luxurious leather driver's seat, breathing in the scent of absolute autonomy. As I pressed the brake pedal to start the engine, my personal cell phone buzzed in the center console. I glanced down at the screen. The notification displayed a new text message from an unsaved number, but I instantly recognized the desperate, frantic tone of the sender. It was my mother. "Fiona, please," the text read. "We have nothing left. Your father's trial starts next month and the lawyers are demanding another retainer. Ashley cannot afford her rent. We are family Fiona. I am begging you. Please just send us something, anything. We need you. I stared at the glowing screen, reading the pathetic plea for salvation from the woman who had called me a dropout, a janitor, and a failure. She was begging for the very resources she had spent her entire life, telling me I was incapable of earning. She wanted the safety net she had actively tried to destroy. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, and no obligation. I tapped the screen, highlighting the message, and calmly pressed delete. I blocked the number, ensuring the silence would remain permanent. I put the car in drive, smoothly navigating out of the parking garage and merging into the flow of evening traffic. I turned onto the highway, heading straight toward the coast, leaving the city and its ghosts far behind me. I rolled down the window, letting the salty ocean breeze rush into the cabin as I drove toward my private beach house, where the horizon was clear and the future was my own.